Mid-1943. The vast Pacific stretches endless and blue beneath the morning haze, its rolling clouds streaked with the vapor trails of Japan's once dominant Zeros. The air hums with confidence as the pilots of the Imperial Japanese Navy fan out in disciplined formation, scanning the glimmering sea below for the telltale wakes of American carrier groups. For months these men had ruled the skies, masters of agility, revered by comrades, feared by foes. But on this morning, something unexpected slices through their domain. Out of the blinding sun, a dark shape rises sharply, sleek, angular, and unnervingly fast. A strange American fighter climbs through the cloud layer, banking into the light with a howl no one among them has heard before. Its wings, bent like a bird of prey, catch the dawn, glinting steel blue. In the cockpits of the Japanese formation, voices burst through the radios, clipped and tense. Shingataka? Is that a new type? The stranger keeps climbing, impossibly steep, its propeller blur a halo of force. One ace later described it as flying like a demon, accelerating in a vertical rise that defied every instinct born from years of aerial supremacy. The Zero, so light and graceful, had always danced around its enemies. But this thing did not dance. It charged, tore through altitude and vanished above them, leaving only a scream of engine power that lingered long after it was gone. Panic prickles the calm professionalism of the formation. The Japanese pilots, trained to read every motion of an opponent's aircraft, now find themselves staring at an enigma. Their throttle levers shove forward. Their engines whine in protest. The stranger, later identified as the Vought F-4U Corsair, leaves them behind. It outclimbs, outruns, and outturns in ways that should have been impossible. "It is faster," one voice crackles over the radio. "It pulls up." Another shouts disbelief carrying through static. Moments later, the sky becomes a chaos of turns and climbs, but the American machine is already gone, fading toward the horizon like a phantom of metal and thunder. For the first time, the hunters of the Pacific feel hunted. The balance of the air war, once tilted toward Japan's mastery, has shifted in an instant of shock and noise. That morning encounter would echo in every ready room and radio log from Rabaul to Truk. Whispers of a new American aircraft spread through the Japanese squadrons, one whose speed and power defied their training and their pride. Few yet knew its name. Fewer still understood how deliberately it had been built to destroy their myth of invincibility. From this moment of stunned disbelief, the story rewinds to its beginnings, back to the cold drafting rooms of Connecticut, where engineers and test pilots fought to create an aircraft unlike anything before it. The Corsair's legend, born in secrecy and skepticism, was about to take flight. Between 1939 and 1941, the age of naval aviation entered a defining transformation. Across the Pacific, the doctrine of air superiority hardened around the image of the turning fight, elegant spirals of aircraft circling in deadly dance. In this arena, Japan's newest creation reigned supreme, the Mitsubishi A6M-0. Introduced in 1940, it was impossibly light, engineered for grace and distance, and capable of outturning anything the West could field. Its long, gliding wings and featherweight frame gave Japan's carrier pilots a weapon of surgical precision. To them, air combat was art. To their enemies, it was survival. When the Zero appeared over China, then the Philippines, and finally Pearl Harbor, the results were devastating. Its combination of range, climb, and maneuverability seemed to defy physics, and for a time it did. In the shadow of those first humiliating encounters, American airmen fought back with what they had. The stubby, rugged F-4F Wildcat clawed through the early Pacific skies, but it was outclassed at altitude and sluggish in a turning fight. U.S. pilots survived through tactics, not technology, thatch-weave maneuvers, diving escapes, and coordinated teamwork designed to offset the Zero's agility. Yet even these hard-won methods were temporary shields. Each new report from the front painted the same picture. The Japanese fighter could climb faster, turn tighter, and strike farther than any American machine then flying. At Guadalcanal and the Solomon Islands, Wildcat squadrons fought valiantly, but the numbers told the truth. Losses mounted, and the Zero's reputation became legend. By 1942, the U.S. Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics faced a brutal equation. The Pacific was not Europe. Its scale dwarfed anything in the Atlantic theater. Battles were fought across thousands of miles, from atolls to jungle airstrips, and a pilot who could not climb or sprint when ambushed rarely lived to fight again. Speed and altitude performance became the new measure of life expectancy. The Navy needed a fighter that could launch from a carrier deck, climb like a rocket, and carry enough firepower to cripple the most agile opponent. It had to be both predator and survivor, a machine built for endurance, reach, and brute strength in a theater where mercy was a myth. The call for such an aircraft landed at Chance Vought's Connecticut plant, a modest company with an audacious proposal. Engineers there promised a fighter that would shatter limits, the first naval aircraft to exceed 400 miles per hour, driven by a monstrous Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine. But this ambition came at a cost. Every line of the prototype screamed excess, a massive propeller that required an inverted gull wing to keep the landing gear short, a fuselage built around an engine that barely fit its frame, and a profile so radical that even Navy test pilots doubted it could ever safely land on a carrier. In the dark months following Pearl Harbor, risk became the only acceptable currency. The Navy, desperate for superiority, gave its reluctant blessing. The Corsair, experimental, temperamental, and unproven, was greenlit for aggressive development through 1942 and into 1943. It was a gamble against physics, against time, and against Japan's head start in the skies. What emerged from that gamble would become a machine so powerful it seemed to mock the very logic of the Zero's design philosophy. And as its wings took shape in the hangars of Stratford, the engineers could not have known that their strange, bent-wing fighter would soon redefine what dominance meant above the Pacific. The next step would prove it. The Corsair's revolutionary design and performance would not just meet the Zero in combat, but overturn the very principles that once gave Japan the edge. In 1943, deep inside the hangars of Chance Vought's Connecticut facility, the future of American naval aviation took on a shape unlike anything that had ever flown from a carrier deck. The F-4U Corsair was no mere improvement. It was a rebellion against every design convention that had governed fighter aircraft before it. At its heart roared the 2,000-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp, a 14-cylinder radial engine of almost monstrous proportion. To harness that power, Vought engineers were forced to innovate. The engine's sheer size demanded a propeller over 13 feet across, so large that traditional landing gear could no longer keep it from striking the deck. The solution was as bizarre as it was brilliant: the inverted gull wing. Its downward bend allowed shorter, stronger landing struts, reducing drag while giving the Corsair its unmistakable predatory stance, wings that seemed ready to pounce. The new airframe was sleek, almost too sleek for its own good. A streamlined fuselage wrapped tightly around the engine like a coiled muscle, and the cockpit sat high and rearward, giving the pilot the impression of flying an arrowhead. On the test line, the aircraft looked more like a racer than a naval fighter, but numbers soon confirmed that beauty hid power. In climbs, the Corsair surged upward at nearly 4,000 feet per minute, reaching 26,000 feet faster than any naval aircraft in history. At that altitude, it could reach 446 miles per hour, over 100 faster than Japan's most feared fighter, the A6M-0. The difference was not incremental, it was generational. The Zero's lightweight frame and 330 mile per hour top speed suddenly seemed fragile, even outdated. What had once been unmatched agility was now prey to brute speed and climbing power. Engineers at Patuxent River and Jacksonville began to discover the limits of their own creation. Test flights in early 1943 pushed the Corsair through high-altitude envelope tests and near-supersonic dives, its wings flexing under brutal stress. Reports noted fierce stall behavior and treacherous torque on takeoff. The double Wasp's raw power could roll the aircraft over if handled carelessly. The Corsair was not gentle. It demanded respect. At dive speeds, it accelerated with terrifying force, the heavy airframe stable even in vertical plunges that would have torn lighter fighters apart. "She dives like a stone and climbs like vengeance," one test pilot wrote in his log, half in admiration, half in awe. Every problem revealed in testing hinted at the fighter's potential in combat. Engineers worked feverishly to tame its wild tendencies, refining throttle response, smoothing out stall recovery, and reinforcing the landing gear for carrier impact. The aircraft's 650 caliber Browning machine guns, mounted in the wings, could shred an enemy in seconds, while its reinforced frame allowed it to carry rockets and bombs, turning a high-speed fighter into a multi-role strike weapon. On paper, the Corsair was no longer simply a match for the Zero. It was designed to obliterate it. By mid-1943, test data confirmed what the pilots could already feel in their bones. The Corsair was a predator at altitude. It could dive faster, climb higher, and still return to the carrier deck intact, a combination Japan's aviators had never faced. But the numbers were only part of the story. No statistic could capture the shock that awaited Japanese pilots when this blue-winged machine first appeared over the Pacific. That moment, the Corsair's true baptism in combat, would turn speculation into legend. February 1943. The blue expanse of the Solomon Islands glittered under a fragile tropical sun as VF-17, the U.S. Navy's newly formed Corsair squadron, the Jolly Rogers, prepared for its first true combat patrol aboard the USS Bunker Hill. These pilots, some freshly trained, others veteran aviators of the Wildcat campaigns, now faced the Pacific in a machine that defied convention. On the 14th of February, over the Russell Islands, the moment of reckoning arrived. Japanese Zeros, long accustomed to effortless dominance at altitude, met the unfamiliar silhouette of the Corsair. The aircraft surged upward in an impossible climb, its R-2800 engine roaring a warning that seemed to transcend human hearing. Vought test pilot Edward C. Butch O'Hare claimed one of the first kills, a feat made possible by the Corsair's astonishing combination of climb rate, speed, and agility, capabilities that made Japanese expectations of aerial combat immediately obsolete. By mid-1943, the Corsair was no longer a novelty. Pilots flew from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, extending the aircraft's reach across the Central Solomons, and from escort carriers supporting operations in the Gilbert and Marshall Islands. Japanese intelligence records from Tinian and Tarawa in late 1943 describe repeated encounters with what they called ghost fighters, machines that seemed to appear from nowhere, rising from far below to attack with a speed and altitude control previously unseen. Reports noted astonishment among veteran Zeros. Corsairs could climb past them, strike and disappear before countermeasures could be coordinated. The inversion of power, once the hunter, now the hunted, was complete. In November at Bougainville, Japanese pilots meticulously documented encounters where Corsairs climbed to 30,000 feet, reaching heights that left their own aircraft struggling to respond. Such records convey more than tactical detail. They reveal a psychological blow. Pilots who had once regarded the Pacific skies as their domain now faced machines whose performance challenged every assumption and doctrine they had been taught. Surprise and bewilderment were constant companions. Axis reports would later note that these Blue Devils required new engagement tactics, forcing changes in formation flying, altitude strategy, and interception planning. The Corsair's debut was not just a technical revelation. It was a strategic shockwave that reverberated through Japanese command, reshaping their understanding of what American naval aviation could achieve. From this astonishing battlefield emergence, we move to examine the broader Axis response, how intelligence analysts interpreted the Corsair threat, how Japanese training and tactics were forced to evolve, and how the perception of invincible aerial dominance began to fracture under the relentless advance of American aviation technology. Throughout 1943 and into 1944, the Japanese Naval Air Force meticulously sifted through incoming reports from the front lines, Rabaul, Truk, and the shifting battlefields of New Guinea. Pilots' accounts were often terse, fragmented, but unmistakable. A high-altitude fighter of unprecedented performance, repeatedly outclimbing and outpacing the vaunted Zero. Intelligence officers labeled it simply as unknown high-altitude fighter, a descriptor loaded with both caution and disbelief. Analysts at Nakajima and Mitsubishi design bureaus attempted to reverse engineer its capabilities from these fragments, drawing diagrams, comparing engine power, estimating wing loading, and speculating on the alloys used in its airframe. The conclusions were unsettling. The Corsair could dive, climb, and accelerate in ways that existing Japanese models could not match. And it carried firepower sufficient to destroy multiple Zeros in a single pass. The phenomenon did not go unnoticed by Axis observers beyond Japan. German liaison officers in East Asia received translated briefings detailing the emergence of new Allied fighters, emphasizing performance characteristics that seemed almost implausible. Japanese radio channels buzzed with disbelief. Phrases like impossible climb and weapon superior in every aspect wove through the static, a chorus of astonishment that underscored the growing unease. Navy intelligence bulletins such as Kaigun Tsuho 1944 No. 48 warned that this unknown fighter routinely exceeded the Zero's speed and climbed above 20,000 feet, shifting the once predictable balance of air combat. Some pilots speculated it might be a British Spitfire, or perhaps a captured Allied prototype, but the consensus was clear. The altitude advantage and raw performance were real, and could not be dismissed as exaggeration. Morale in frontline squadrons subtly eroded. Veteran pilots who had long relied on superior agility now faced a mystery fiend that struck without warning, leaving them scrambling for defensive tactics that often proved inadequate. Letters and diaries later recovered hint at a creeping psychological strain, a recognition that the air above the Pacific no longer belonged solely to them. Japanese designers and commanders alike began to internalize a new reality. Allied aviation, spearheaded by the Corsair, was evolving faster than their capacity to counter it. The very idea that a fighter could combine speed, altitude, and firepower in a single platform forced a reconsideration of engagement strategy, training regimens, and material development priorities. With the enemy struggling to understand and respond to this airborne revelation, the United States moved to capitalize. The next chapter of the Corsair story reveals how American industry scaled production, refined logistics, and deployed the aircraft across carriers and forward bases, ensuring that the lessons learned in prototype testing and early combat encounters translated into a decisive and widespread advantage. In the Pacific Theater. Corsair, production commenced in earnest by mid-1942, first at Vaught's Dallas facility, soon followed by the sprawling New Haven plant, where engineers and assembly workers labored to transform prototypes into mass-produced machines of war. By mid-1943, the Brewster plant had joined the effort under license, fabricating FB series Corsairs to meet the Navy's rapidly expanding requirements. Between 1943 and 1945, more than 12,500 Corsairs rolled from American assembly lines, a staggering total of 12,571 aircraft, each one a fusion of raw power, precision engineering, and painstaking craftsmanship. The R-2800 engines, heart of the fighter's extraordinary performance, were delivered from Pratt & Whitney plants in Hartford and Philadelphia, while auxiliary components and specialized systems arrived from Wright, Allison, and Hamilton Standard, forming a vast network of industrial interdependence. The logistical feat extended far beyond production lines. Corsairs were crated and shipped across thousands of miles to forward airstrips and island bases, such as Espiritu Santo, Emirau, and Ulithi between late 1943 and 1944. Floating repair ships accompanied the Pacific Fleet, stocked with spare parts, drop tanks, replacement wings, and propeller assemblies, allowing squadrons to maintain operational readiness even in the most remote locations. Each aircraft arriving at a forward base represented not only raw firepower, but also the culmination of a finely tuned supply chain, one capable of sustaining continuous sorties and rapid replacement of losses. Deployment mirrored the Navy's island-hopping strategy. Corsairs appeared over Tarawa in November 1943, surged into the skies above Kwajalein in February 1944, and struck decisively over Saipan by June 1944. With multiple squadrons able to operate in the same theater, American pilots began to impose air superiority over successive campaigns, their numbers and logistical support giving them both flexibility and endurance. In every encounter, the combination of robust engineering, sustained maintenance, and strategic positioning allowed the Corsair to deliver consistent, overwhelming performance against Axis forces. The massive industrial and logistical scale of deployment ensured that by late 1944, the Corsair was no longer a rare or experimental fighter. It was a ubiquitous presence across the Pacific. Its numbers, paired with refined tactics and combat experience, reinforced the psychological and material advantages first glimpsed in the Solomons. With production stabilized and fleets fully equipped, the Corsair now moved from isolated shock engagements to sustained dominance, setting the stage for further battlefield proofs in subsequent campaigns that would cement its reputation as the Pacific's most formidable naval fighter. Despite its battlefield dominance, the Corsair was far from flawless. Early operational deployments revealed significant challenges that tested both pilot skill and engineering ingenuity. Carrier landings were notoriously difficult. The long, upward-sloping nose obstructed forward visibility, making deck alignment precarious, while the powerful R2800 engine produced severe torque at low speed, threatening ground loops on landing approaches. At high velocity, compressibility effects in dives pushed airframe limits, and at extreme altitudes, overheating occasionally taxed the engine beyond safe thresholds. Each sortie demanded acute attention, and even the most experienced pilots had to respect the machine's quirks. In response, Vought and the U.S. Navy initiated a series of technical modifications in early 1944. Leading-edge flaps improved low-speed handling, landing gear was reinforced, wings were clipped to better suit the confined space of fleet carriers, and tail assemblies were strengthened to withstand high-G maneuvers. Pilots adapted alongside the engineers, emphasizing tactics that leveraged the Corsair's strengths while mitigating its weaknesses. Engagements were fought above 20,000 feet whenever possible. Layered formations maintained mutual protection, and slow-turning dogfights were consciously avoided. The combination of engineering refinement and tactical adaptation allowed the aircraft to remain dominant without overextending its operational envelope. The Axis response mirrored this dynamic. Japanese designers, already alarmed by the Corsair's performance, accelerated development of next-generation fighters such as the Mitsubishi A7M Reppu and the Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate, each intended to counter high-performance Allied aircraft. Turbochargers, more powerful engines and structural reinforcements were tested to close the gap. But by late war, industrial shortages and material constraints severely limited production and deployment. Even in a theater where superior technology was coveted, the Japanese could not fully counter the strategic and tactical advantages that the Corsair had already established. Thus, while formidable and psychologically dominant, the Corsair was not invincible. Its operational history reflects a balance of innovation, adaptation, and disciplined employment. An aircraft whose successes were inseparable from the ingenuity of its designers and the skill of its pilots. With these trade-offs and responses in mind, the narrative now shifts beyond wartime combat, exploring the Corsair's post-war legacy and its enduring influence on aviation design, tactics, and the collective imagination of naval air power. After 1945, the Corsair continued its service far beyond the Pacific War, carving out a distinguished role in the Korean War and within the air forces of multiple Allied nations. Its design principles, immense power-to-weight ratio, exceptional climb and high-altitude performance, and the energy-centric tactics pioneered during the Pacific campaigns, left a lasting imprint on the emerging jet era. Aviation historians regard the Corsair as a critical bridge between piston-engine fighters and early turbojet doctrine, a proving ground where lessons in energy management, altitude advantage, and rapid strike capability were refined under the unforgiving realities of combat. Jet trainers and early fighter prototypes inherited much from the Corsair's tactical playbook. Dive and climb engagements, the management of kinetic energy in combat, and approaches to avoiding extended turning fights became foundational concepts in post-war aerial strategy. Its distinctive inverted gull wing attracted attention from designers studying aerodynamics and structural efficiency, while its climb performance, acceleration, and operational envelope informed the development of aircraft for the early Cold War. Even in Japan, captured Corsairs provided invaluable data. Engineers meticulously analyzed their airframes, engine design, and flight characteristics, integrating insights into post-war Western-inspired projects. The Corsair's wartime achievements transcended statistics and sortie counts, entering the realm of legend. Stories of its unmatched climb, speed, and ferocity against the vaunted Zero became enduring narratives, celebrated in pilot memoirs, after-action reports, and aviation history alike. Its impact was both material and psychological. A fighter that had transformed tactical engagements, reshaped doctrines, and eroded enemy morale while elevating Allied confidence across the Pacific. Having traced the arc from its genesis in U.S. factories to its baptism in the Solomons, its operational maturation across the Marianas, Philippines, and Okinawa, and finally its post-war influence, the story closes by returning to that first dawn interception over the Russell Islands. A single Corsair, silhouetted against the rising sun, had challenged assumptions, defied expectations, and heralded a shift in air power that would reverberate far beyond one war, leaving an indelible mark on aviation history and the course of the Pacific Campaign. Between the sweeping campaigns and decisive battles, smaller vignettes offer vivid insight into how the Corsair's capabilities translated into daily combat dominance. In March 1944 at Bougainville, a Marine pilot recalled climbing from 8,000 to 25,000 feet in mere minutes before encountering a formation of Zeros, a maneuver that left the enemy struggling to respond. Over Truk in June 1944, a carrier-based Corsair dove past a Zero escort to down a reconnaissance float plane, its speed and dive acceleration rendering interception almost impossible. By mid-1945, patrols above the Philippines captured similar episodes. Corsairs spotted incoming kamikaze Zeros and climbed ahead, engaging with calculated precision and exploiting the full envelope of their aircraft's performance. In each case, Japanese pilots recorded their astonishment in logbooks and combat reports. The Corsair was often misidentified as an unimaginable enemy fighter, an unknown threat that prompted hesitation, delayed attacks, or cautious reassessment mid-flight. These microcosms reveal a consistent pattern. The combination of climb rate, speed, armament, and structural resilience consistently forced Axis airmen onto the defensive, even when they held numerical parity. Beyond raw kills or sortie counts, these individual encounters underscored the psychological and tactical leverage the Corsair provided in every theater it touched. Such episodic records punctuate the broader narrative, illustrating not just technical superiority, but the lived reality of aerial engagement. From Solomons to Marianas, Philippines, and beyond, the Corsair repeatedly redefined expectations, leaving both pilots and planners scrambling to comprehend its capabilities. These encounters, both dramatic and subtle, complement the larger strategic and operational picture, offering a window into how a single aircraft could reshape combat at every level. Having traced individual stories across multiple theaters and observed the cumulative effect on tactics, morale, and strategic reach, the next step is to compare the Corsair's performance and battlefield impact with other Allied aircraft of the era, highlighting both unique advantages and shared lessons before concluding the Corsair's enduring legacy. Back at dawn over the endless blue of the Pacific, the familiar arcs of Japanese Zeros slice through the cloud shadows, scanning for American carriers as they had countless times before. Yet on this morning, the scene repeats itself with a startling difference. A sleek, unfamiliar silhouette climbs past them, powerful and inexorable. Inside, the Corsair pilot carries the same combination of calm precision and mechanical confidence that had, over months of combat, altered the balance of the Pacific Air War. In that fleeting encounter, the broader story of innovation, training, and industrial might is distilled into a single decisive moment. That silhouette embodies more than a machine. It symbolizes a fundamental disruption of assumptions. The Corsair undermined a dominant model of air combat, challenging the notion that the Japanese Zero could maintain unbroken supremacy in the sky. Across the islands of the Pacific, from Solomons to Marianas, the Philippines, and Okinawa, it reshaped tactics, morale, and doctrine. Pilots who once ruled the skies now hesitated. American aviators moved with initiative and confidence, leveraging speed, climb, and firepower to seize every engagement. The Corsair's influence did not end with the war. Its principles, powerful engines, energy-centric tactics, and disciplined application of speed and altitude echoed into the jet age, informing post-war fighter design and Cold War aerial doctrine. Even decades later, the aircraft's legacy resonates in aviation thought, in the careful study of climb performance, energy management, and the integration of engineering with tactical doctrine. From the first stunned reactions of Japanese pilots to its sustained operational dominance, and through its lessons in post-war aviation, the Corsair stands as a testament to the interplay of engineering, strategy, and the psychological dimensions of aerial warfare. As those logbooks once recorded fear, confusion, and awe, so too does history remember how one fighter, crafted, refined, and deployed with precision, could surprise, overpower, and reshape the course of a war.